Millionaire didn't know he had a son until he saw the bracelet he gave his ex on a poor 11-year-old girl's wrist. Comment below where in the world you're watching from, and get ready for a story that will touch your heart. The morning sun glinted off the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jason Miller's penthouse, painting golden streaks across imported marble floors. At 42, Jason had mastered the art of efficiency. Even sleep was scheduled to precision. His alarm chimed at exactly 5:30 a.m., though he'd already been awake for 7 minutes, staring at the ocean view that had cost him more than most people earned in a lifetime. "Good morning, Mr. Miller." His personal assistant's voice came through the integrated home system. Today's schedule includes the quarterly board meeting at 8:30, followed by the acquisition briefing at 10:15. The legal team needs your signature on the Thompson deal by noon, and "Send the Thompson papers to my office," Jason interrupted, already moving toward his immaculate bathroom. "I'll review them before the board meeting." Within 30 minutes, Jason was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his reflection in the mirror showing a man at the peak of professional success. His face, handsome in a stern, unyielding way, revealed little of the emptiness that had begun to hollow him from within. The elevator descended silently to the private garage where his driver waited. "Morning, sir," the man said, opening the door to the sleek black sedan. Jason nodded curtly, already scanning emails on his tablet. There was no time for pleasantries in the life of a CEO worth billions. At Miller Technologies headquarters, employees straightened as he strode through the main floor, his presence causing a ripple of tension. In the 12 years since founding, the company Jason had cultivated a reputation for brilliant vision coupled with merciless precision. Failure was unacceptable. Excellence was merely expected. The projections looked promising, his CFO reported during the board meeting, gesturing to charts that showed consistently climbing profits. Q4 should exceed expectations by approximately 12%. Jason listened, asked pointed questions, made swift decisions that would affect thousands of lives, all without a flicker of doubt or hesitation. This was what he had built his life for: complete control, unquestionable success. Yet later that night, standing alone in his penthouse with a glass of 30-year-old scotch, Jason found himself once again staring at the glittering city below. The empire he had built spread before him. Buildings bearing his company's logo, products used in millions of homes, a name recognized globally. He took a sip of the amber liquid, savoring its complexity. Strange how even the finest scotch tasted somehow hollow when drunk alone night after night. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. Jason Miller had everything money could buy, everything ambition could achieve. So why did it all feel like nothing at all? Jason Miller's morning routine was interrupted by an urgent call from his PR director. "The Forbes profile just went live, sir. It's quite flattering." Minutes later, Jason stared at his own face on the digital cover, stern eyes looking directly into the camera, the Manhattan skyline behind him. The headline read, "The Algorithm King: How Jason Miller Built a $17 billion Empire from a Dorm Room Dream." The article chronicled his journey from scholarship student to tech magnate with almost reverent detail. It praised his surgical business acumen and uncompromising pursuit of excellence. The writer had even unearthed anecdotes from his college days, how he'd worked 3 jobs while maintaining a perfect GPA, how he'd turned down a prestigious internship to launch his first startup. What the article failed to mention were the costs, the friendships that withered from neglect, the family holidays missed for business trips, the relationships abandoned when they threatened to compete with his ambition. Jason scrolled to a paragraph about his legendary focus. "Success requires sacrifice," he'd been quoted saying. "You have to decide what matters most." He closed the article and gazed out his office window. Had he really decided? Or had he simply defaulted to the path of least emotional risk? That evening, the company's board hosted a celebration dinner at an exclusive restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. Crystal glasses clinked as executives toasted their visionary leader. "To Jason," his CFO declared, "who's made us all very rich by never having a life." Laughter rippled around the table. Jason forced a smile, but the words lingered like smoke in his lungs. Later, as waiters cleared dessert plates, the conversation turned to families and vacation plans. Jason listened as his executives shared stories of children's graduations, anniversary trips, weekend sailing adventures. "What about you, Jason?" someone asked. "All work and no play?" He gave his practiced answer about an upcoming industry conference in Tokyo. But for the first time, the words tasted strange in his mouth. Back in his penthouse, Jason poured himself a scotch and pulled up the Forbes article again. Between paragraphs praising his business genius were photos from various stages of his career, always alone, always working. No wedding pictures, no family portraits, no evidence of a life beyond Miller Technologies. He thought of Elizabeth then, not intentionally, but like muscle memory. Elizabeth Reynolds with her artist's hands and uncompromising honesty. The woman who'd once told him, "Your ambition is both your greatest strength and your prison, Jason." He dismissed her concern then, certain he could have it all eventually. First success, then happiness. First the empire, then the life. 12 years later, he had the empire, but where was the life? Jason's phone buzzed with an urgent email from the Tokyo team. He reflexively reached for it, then stopped, his hand suspended in midair. When had work become his reflex, his comfort, his escape? When had it become everything? The realization crept over him like a shadow. Success had become his addiction, achievement his drug of choice. While he'd been busy conquering markets and crushing competitors, life had been passing him by, one missed moment at a time. The Forbes article ended with speculation about Jason's next big move. Whatever Miller targets next will undoubtedly transform the industry, the writer had predicted confidently. Jason stared at the words, feeling something unfamiliar crack inside him. What if his next move had nothing to do with business at all? He dismissed the thought immediately. This momentary discontent was nothing, just fatigue from the Tokyo negotiations, perhaps too much scotch. Tomorrow he would be focused again, driven again. Yet as he prepared for bed precisely at 10:15 as always, the CFO's toast echoed in his mind. Never having a life. Is that how they saw him? Is that who he had become? And more troubling still, was it too late to become someone else? Jason was leaving a technology conference when he heard a familiar voice calling his name. "Miller! Jason Miller, is that you?" Turned to see Thomas Chen, his former college roommate, pushing through the crowd. The years had added silver to Thomas's temples and weight to his frame, but his smile remained unchanged. "Thomas," Jason said, automatically extending his hand. "It's been, what, 10 years? At least. How's life at the top?" Thomas laughed, but his eyes were kind. "I saw your Forbes cover. You certainly made good on those big plans of yours." They exchanged pleasantries, Thomas sharing stories about his modest engineering firm and his family. 3 kids, a house in the suburbs, a golden retriever named Einstein. Jason listened, offering carefully curated highlights of his own achievements. As they prepared to part ways, Thomas asked, "Do you ever hear from Elizabeth Reynolds? You two were inseparable back then." The name hit Jason like a physical blow. "Elizabeth? No, we lost touch after graduation." "Shame," Thomas said. "You guys seemed perfect together. She became quite the respected art teacher from what I heard." "Well, good seeing you, Jason. Don't be a stranger." That night, Jason found himself pulling a lockbox from the back of his closet. He hadn't opened it in years, yet the combination came to his fingers without hesitation. Inside lay the carefully preserved artifacts of a different life. Concert tickets, handwritten letters, photographs. One photo in particular caught his attention. Jason and Elizabeth at Walden Pond, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, his arms wrapped around her as they laughed at something now forgotten. They looked impossibly young, impossibly happy. Jason remembered that day with painful clarity. They'd skipped classes to spend the afternoon by the water, Elizabeth sketching the landscape while he outlined his business ideas. "We'll change the world together," he had promised. Your art, my technology, a perfect match. He set the photo aside and reached for the small jewelry box at the bottom of the lockbox. It was empty now, but he remembered what it had held. Custom sapphire bracelet with their initials discreetly engraved on the clasp. A parting gift he'd given Elizabeth the day everything changed. That day had begun with celebration. Jason had received an offer from a venture capitalist, significant funding for his startup, but with a catch. He would need to relocate to Silicon Valley immediately. It's just temporary, he'd assured Elizabeth. A year, maybe 2. Then we can be together again. But Elizabeth had seen through him, as she always did. This is just the beginning, Jason. There will always be another deal, another opportunity, another reason to put our life together on hold. I'm doing this for us, he'd insisted. No, she'd said quietly. You're doing it for yourself. And that's okay. But let's not pretend it's something else. She'd handed him back the bracelet. I can't be the thing you return to when you've conquered the world, Jason. I need to be the world you're building alongside. He'd left the next day, convinced he could have both, the success and the relationship. By the time he realized Elizabeth had been right, too much time had passed, too many opportunities to choose differently. Now, alone in his penthouse, Jason searched Elizabeth's name online. He found articles about her teaching career, an award she'd received for arts education, photographs of exhibits she'd organized. The most recent information was from 2 years ago. Then nothing. It was as if she'd vanished, leaving Jason with nothing but memories and the hollow ache of what might have been. The labor practices scandal is hurting our public image, Mr. Miller, said Rebecca Liu, Miller Technologies' head of public relations. We need to demonstrate corporate responsibility. Jason frowned at the data on his tablet. The expose about working conditions in their overseas facilities had caused a 7% drop in stock value and endless social media outrage. What do you suggest? He asked, already impatient with this distraction from actual business. Rebecca outlined several options, but it was Marcus Jenkins, Jason's longtime friend and legal counsel, who offered the winning idea. A mentorship program, Marcus said, leaning forward. Tech education for underprivileged youth. It's personal, impactful, and directly addresses the heartless tech giant narrative. Jason immediately shook his head. I don't have time to babysit teenagers. You wouldn't need much involvement, Rebecca assured him. Just attend the launch, maybe a few photo ops. And if you actually showed up for the mentoring once in a while, it wouldn't hurt, Marcus added with a knowing smile. Later, alone with Jason in his office, Marcus dropped the PR facade. Look, you need this, not just the company, you. Since when are you my therapist? Jason asked, irritated. Since Harvard, when I watched you transform from an actual human into whatever. Marcus gestured vaguely at Jason. This is. When was the last time you did something that wasn't about making money or crushing competitors? Jason had no answer. 2 weeks later, the future digital project was announced with considerable fanfare. Jason insisted on strict parameters. The program would focus exclusively on technology and entrepreneurship, subjects he understood, and his personal involvement would be minimal. I'll provide funding and curriculum guidance, he told the planning committee. But I have a company to run. The committee nodded, already accustomed to the limitations of working with corporate donors. Only Sofia Garcia, the community center director, seemed unimpressed by his conditions. These kids don't need another distant benefactor throwing money at them, she said during a planning session. They need actual mentors who show up. Jason bristled at her directness. Ms. Garcia, I assure you my financial contribution is very generous, she interrupted, but money doesn't teach kids to code. People do. Her words stayed with him, an irritating splinter in his otherwise orderly thoughts. When Marcus sent him the PR schedule that included monthly visits to the center, Jason didn't immediately reject it as he would have before. Instead, he found himself remembering his own youth, the community college professor who'd first introduced him to programming, the hours he'd spent in the computer lab because the apartment he shared with his mother couldn't afford decent internet. Fine, he finally told Marcus. I'll do the minimum required participation. But don't expect me to suddenly become some inspirational figure to these kids. I'm a businessman, not a teacher. Marcus smiled knowingly. Of course, Jason. Whatever you say. The launch of the Future Digital project attracted more media attention than Jason had anticipated. Business journals praised Miller Technologies for its progressive approach to corporate responsibility, while local papers featured photographs of Jason standing awkwardly beside excited teenagers. The carefully choreographed event was proceeding exactly as planned, until a reporter from the Boston Chronicle raised her hand. "Mr. Miller," she called out, "what in your own childhood inspired you to create this opportunity for disadvantaged youth?" Jason froze momentarily. His PR team had prepared him for questions about the program's goals and metrics, not personal inquiries. "I believe in the transformative power of technology," he answered mechanically. "It's important that all young people have access to the tools that will shape tomorrow's economy," the reporter persisted. "But what personal connection do you have to these communities? What drives you to help these specific children?" Jason felt a trickle of sweat down his back. "I simply recognize talent can come from anywhere," he said, his voice unnaturally stiff. "Our company benefits when we expand the talent pool." Even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow, a corporate platitude rather than a human response. That night, alone in his penthouse, Jason poured himself a larger scotch than usual. The reporter's questions had unearthed memories he preferred to keep buried. He remembered his mother, Elena Miller, working 3 jobs to keep them afloat after his father abandoned them. He remembered the shame of free lunch vouchers, the apartment with perpetually broken heating, the nights his mother fell asleep at the kitchen table, exhausted from her endless shifts. He remembered vowing at 12 years old that he would never be dependent on anyone, that he would build a fortress around himself so secure that nothing, and no one, could ever make him vulnerable again. That fortress now stretched 52 stories into the Boston skyline, housed over 5,000 employees, and generated billions in revenue. By any objective measure, Jason had succeeded beyond his wildest childhood dreams. Yet standing at his window, glass in hand, he confronted an uncomfortable truth. His fortress had become his prison. He had built walls so impenetrable that nothing could hurt him, yes, but nothing could reach him either. The teenagers at the community center had looked at him today with a mixture of awe and suspicion, sensing perhaps that his presence among them was merely transactional, another business deal, another performance. For the first time in years, Jason wondered if the life he had constructed was actually the one he wanted, if the success he had achieved at such cost was truly success at all. "You're being ridiculous," he muttered to himself, draining his glass. "This is exactly what you worked for." But as he prepared for bed with his usual precision, a small, persistent voice whispered that perhaps he had been working for the wrong things all along. Jason arrived at the community center for his first mentoring session with the precision of a military operation. His assistant had scheduled exactly 60 minutes, his driver waited outside, and his talking points had been meticulously prepared by the PR team. What he hadn't prepared for was the actual teenagers. 20 pairs of eyes studied him as he entered. The computer lab, some with naked curiosity, others with thinly veiled skepticism. These weren't the polished business school graduates he usually addressed. They were high schoolers with backpacks, smartphones, and the unnerving ability to detect inauthenticity from 50 paces. "Welcome, Mr. Miller," Sofia Garcia said with professional courtesy, though Jason detected a hint of challenge in her tone. "The students are eager to learn from your expertise." He cleared his throat and launched into his prepared speech about entrepreneurship and wealth building. He showed slides of exponential growth curves and market penetration metrics. He quoted the same financial advice he'd given at executive retreats. "By focusing on scalable solutions and investor-ready concepts," he explained, clicking to the next slide, "each of you could potentially become millionaires before age 30. The room remained silent. Jason, accustomed to audiences hanging on his every word, felt an unfamiliar discomfort. Finally, a girl in the back row raised her hand. "Mr. Miller, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Jason replied, relieved at the engagement. "Are you happy?" The simplicity of the question caught him completely off guard. That's not relevant to today's topic. But isn't it? The girl persisted. What's the point of being rich if you're miserable? Jason glanced at his watch. I think we should focus on practical skills rather than philosophical questions. Thankfully, Sophia intervened, directing students to turn on their computers for a coding exercise. Jason retreated to the perimeter of the room, his fortress of business expertise suddenly useless in this unfamiliar territory. As the session concluded, Jason made a hasty exit, nodding curtly to Sophia's, "See you next month." In the sanctuary of his car, he exhaled deeply, surprisingly exhausted from the brief encounter. "How'd it go, sir?" his driver, Ramon, asked. "Fine," Jason replied automatically. Ramon nodded, pulling into traffic. After a few minutes of silence, he ventured, "My daughter's about their age, 17, smart as a whip." Before Jason could shut down the conversation, Ramon was already reaching for his wallet, flipping it open to show a photograph of a smiling girl in graduation robes. "Valedictorian," Ramon said, his voice thick with pride. "First in our family to go to college." Jason studied the man's face, transformed by simple joy. When was the last time he, Jason Miller, had felt that kind of uncomplicated pride in another person? Had he ever? Back in his penthouse, unable to focus on the quarterly reports, Jason found himself typing Elizabeth Reynolds Boston into a search engine. The results showed her professional achievements, an arts education award, gallery exhibitions she'd curated, a profile in an education journal praising her innovative teaching methods. The most recent information was from 2 years ago, an announcement that she'd received tenure at a prestigious arts high school in Boston. After that, nothing. It was as if she'd vanished from the digital world. Jason stared at her photograph on the school's faculty page. Her auburn hair was shorter than he remembered, elegant silver streaks now framing her face, but her eyes still held that same intensity, the gaze that had once seen through all his careful defenses. What would Elizabeth think of him now? Would she recognize anything of the young man she had loved in the billionaire he had become? The question lingered, unanswered, as the city lights blinked on outside his window. Jason returned to the community center with a completely different approach. Gone were the investor pitches and wealth-building strategies. Instead, he brought practical coding exercises, real-world problem-solving challenges, and, most surprising to himself, a genuine curiosity about these young people. "Today we're going to build a simple app," he announced, feeling strangely nervous. "Something that solves a real problem in your daily lives." The students, initially wary, gradually warmed to his more hands-on approach. Jason moved through the room answering questions, offering suggestions, finding himself increasingly engaged in their creative solutions. "Mr. Miller," called a thin boy with glasses too large for his face, "could you look at my code? It keeps crashing." Jason pulled up a chair beside him. Michael Torres, according to the name tag, had attempted an ambitious project, a scheduling app that incorporated public transportation delays. "You're thinking like a real programmer," Jason said, scanning the code. "The problem is here. You're not accounting for this variable to be empty sometimes." Together they fixed the bug, Michael's face lighting up when the program finally ran correctly. "That's so cool. I've been stuck on that for days." The genuine excitement in the boy's voice triggered something unexpected in Jason, a warm satisfaction entirely different from closing a billion-dollar deal or outmaneuvering a competitor. "You remind me of myself at your age," Jason found himself saying, "always tackling the most complicated problem in the room." Michael looked up, surprised. "You weren't always, you know." "Rich?" Jason finished with an unexpected smile. "No. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment with my mom. We were on assistance programs. My first computer was salvaged from a dumpster behind the community college." The words had escaped before Jason could censor them. He never discussed his background, not with employees, not with the press, not even with Marcus most of the time. Michael studied him with new interest. "For real? So how did you—" "Hard work, some lucky breaks, and a lot of all-nighters," Jason answered. then added something he'd never acknowledged aloud. And plenty of mistakes along the way. By the session's end, Jason had connected with several students, particularly Michael, whose raw talent reminded him painfully of his younger self. To his own surprise, when Sophia mentioned an upcoming coding competition the students were entering, Jason immediately offered to help them prepare. That would mean coming in twice a month instead of once, Sophia pointed out, not bothering to hide her surprise. I'll make it work, Jason replied. Back at Miller Technologies headquarters, his executive team noticed the subtle changes. His assistant was baffled when Jason instructed her to keep the mentoring sessions as immovable appointments in his schedule. His CFO raised eyebrows when Jason delayed a potential acquisition discussion to attend the students' competition. What's gotten into you? Marcus asked over their weekly lunch. First you reschedule the Tokyo investors, now you're personally overseeing this mentorship program. Are you having some kind of midlife awakening? Don't be dramatic, Jason replied, but without his usual edge. I'm simply ensuring the company's philanthropy efforts are effective. Marcus studied him thoughtfully. Well, whatever it is, keep it up. You seem almost human lately. The comment would have annoyed Jason before. Now he simply shrugged, his thoughts already turning to Michael's coding project and how to help him optimize it. Jason found himself checking his calendar more frequently as each mentoring session approached. The program, once a PR obligation, had somehow become the highlight of his otherwise regimented week. He had upgraded the center's aging computers with state-of-the-art equipment, recruited top programmers from his company to provide additional support, and even established a scholarship fund for students who wanted to pursue tech careers after graduation. You're really invested in this program, Sophia observed one afternoon as they watched the students work. I have to admit, I didn't see that coming. Jason glanced at her, noting for the first time the warm intelligence in her dark eyes. Neither did I, he admitted. What changed? The question was direct, like everything about Sofia Garcia. Unlike his business associates who carefully measured every word in his presence, she spoke to him as if his net worth were irrelevant. They remind me that technology isn't just about market share and profit margins, Jason said after a moment. It's about possibility. Creation. I'd forgotten that somewhere along the way. Sophia studied him thoughtfully. Most corporate sponsors write checks and attend galas. They don't roll up their sleeves and teach debugging techniques to teenagers. Most corporate sponsors probably didn't learn coding in community centers, Jason heard himself say. A look of genuine surprise crossed Sophia's face. You never mentioned that in your interviews. It doesn't fit the image, he replied with unexpected candor. After the session ended, they walked together to the center's small kitchen. As Jason helped himself to coffee, Sophia leaned against the counter. I grew up in a similar program in East Harlem, she said. Single mom, 4 kids, endless bills. These arts and education programs were my lifeline. Jason nodded, sensing she was offering something personal in exchange for his earlier vulnerability. I never felt like I belonged in the academic world, she continued. Too brown, too poor, too. She gestured vaguely. Real. But one mentor saw something in me, pushed me to apply to colleges I thought were impossible dreams. Clearly they weren't impossible, Jason observed. No, just terrifying. Her smile was both wry and genuine. I spent my first 2 years at Columbia, feeling like an imposter, like someone would finally realize I didn't belong and kick me out. Jason felt a strange ripple of recognition. I know exactly what you mean. Sophia looked genuinely surprised. You? The tech billionaire? Especially me, he replied quietly. Success doesn't cure that feeling. Sometimes it makes it worse. The moment hung between them, a bridge of unexpected understanding. Jason felt oddly exposed, yet not uncomfortable. When was the last time he'd had a conversation this honest with anyone? Later that week, during a crucial strategy meeting, Jason found his thoughts drifting to Sophia's passionate defense of a student who was struggling with advanced concepts, but refusing to give up. The elegant solution she'd helped the girl discover. The pride in both their faces when the program finally ran correctly. Mr. Miller, his CFO prompted. Your thoughts on the Asian market expansion? Jason blinked, returning to the boardroom. Let's revisit the projections, he said automatically, but part of his mind remained at the community center. A distraction, unprecedented in his meticulously controlled life. Jason stood in his bathroom, staring at his reflection with unfamiliar scrutiny. The face looking back at him belonged to a successful CEO, confident, controlled, impeccably groomed. Yet lately, he'd begun to wonder if this carefully crafted exterior housed a stranger. Who are you, really? He murmured to his reflection. The question had first surfaced during yesterday's mentoring session. Michael and the other students had been discussing their future dreams with surprising clarity. I want to build accessibility software, Michael had said. My sister's blind and most tech isn't designed for her. Another student wanted to create educational games for her younger siblings. A third dreamed of developing affordable medical diagnostics for communities like the one she grew up in. Each teenager had a purpose that extended beyond personal gain, a vision that connected to something larger than themselves. When one of them had innocently asked Jason, "What made you start your company?" He'd given his standard answer about market opportunities and technological innovation. But later, alone in his office, he confronted the question more honestly. What had been his true motivation? To prove his worth? To ensure he'd never be vulnerable again? To show everyone who'd ever underestimated him that they were wrong? All valid reasons perhaps, but hollow compared to the teenager's simple desire to help others. On impulse, Jason called Marcus. I'm thinking of reducing my operational role in the company, he said without preamble. A long pause followed. Who is this? And what have you done with Jason Miller? Marcus finally replied. I'm serious. I want to delegate more day-to-day operations, focus on bigger picture initiatives, and spend more time at the community center, though he didn't say this aloud. Are you having some kind of crisis? Marcus asked, only half joking. Maybe I'm just evolving, Jason replied. The changes began small but noticeable. Jason started leaving the office by 6 instead of 9. He delegated meetings he once would have insisted on handling personally. He even adopted a dog, a scrappy terrier mix from the local shelter that the adoption counselor described as particular about his people, but fiercely loyal once he trusts you. Sounds familiar, Jason had muttered, signing the adoption papers. Now Rocky slept on a plush bed in the corner of Jason's home office, his presence somehow making the penthouse feel less like a showcase and more like a home. The business press noticed the transformation. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile titled, The Humanization of Boston's Tech Titan, noting Jason's increased philanthropic activities and more accessible public persona. When a prominent business magazine requested an interview about his personal evolution, Jason hesitated. What could he say? That mentoring underprivileged teenagers had made him question his entire value system? That he'd begun to wonder if his billions had cost him the only things that really mattered? That night, over drinks with Marcus, Jason admitted the truth he'd been avoiding. I still think about her. Marcus didn't need to ask who her was. Elizabeth? Jason nodded. Pathetic, right? 12 years later. Not pathetic, Marcus said quietly. Human. The community center buzzed with excitement. After months of hard work, the first cohort of the Future Digital project was graduating. Proud parents filled folding chairs, smartphones ready to capture their children's moment of achievement. Jason stood at the back of the room rehearsing his speech. He had written it himself, no PR team, no corporate messaging, just honest. Words about the journey he'd shared with these remarkable young people. As he scanned the audience, his gaze caught on an unfamiliar face in the last row. A girl, perhaps 11 or 12, sat alone, observing everything with keen intelligence. Something about her, the tilt of her head, the thoughtful intensity of her expression, triggered a strange sense of recognition in Jason, though he was certain they'd never met. After his speech and the presentation of certificates, Jason moved through the crowd. accepting congratulations and posing for photos. He gradually worked his way toward the back of the room, curious about the solitary young observer. She was examining the students' projects displayed on tables around the perimeter, her slender fingers gently touching a robotic arm built by one of his mentees. "That one responds to voice commands," Jason said, approaching carefully so as not to startle her. "Michael built it for his sister." The girl looked up, her eyes widening slightly at being addressed by the event's keynote speaker. "It's really clever," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I like how he included tactile feedback." Jason was impressed by her vocabulary and insight. "Are you interested in robotics?" "More digital art, actually," she replied, "but I like seeing how different technologies can work together. My cousin Derek is in this program. He's the one who built the environmental monitoring system." "Derek Williams." Jason nodded. "Excellent spatial reasoning skills." The girl smiled, pleased by the recognition of her relative. "He says you're a good teacher. Not boring like he expected a billionaire to be." Jason laughed, genuinely amused by the backhanded compliment. "I'm glad I exceeded such low expectations. I'm Jason Miller." "Harper Williams," she replied, extending her hand with surprising formality. As she reached out, the sleeve of her cardigan slipped back, revealing a flash of blue and silver at her wrist. Jason's world narrowed to a pinpoint, his breath catching. In his throat, a sapphire bracelet. Not just any bracelet, he would know that specific design anywhere. Custom made 12 years ago, with tiny initialed links that spelled J and E when arranged in sequence. "That's a beautiful bracelet," he managed, his voice strangely hoarse. Harper glanced down, her expression softening. "It was my mom's. She died 2 years ago." Her fingers touched the sapphires with gentle reverence. "I'm only allowed to wear it for special occasions." Jason felt as though the floor beneath him had disappeared. "Your mother," he said carefully. "What was her name?" "Elizabeth," Harper replied. "Elizabeth Reynolds. She was an art teacher." Jason somehow managed to finish the conversation with Harper, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside him. The moment she walked away to congratulate her cousin, he sought out Sophia, pulling her into an empty office. "Harper Williams," he said, his voice barely controlled. "What do you know about her?" Sophia frowned at his intensity. "Derek's cousin? Not much. Her grandmother brings her to pick Derek up sometimes." "Why?" "Her mother was Elizabeth Reynolds." "Yes, I believe so. She passed away a couple of years ago. Car accident on Route 9 during a storm. Harper lives with her grandmother now." "Jason, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." In many ways, he had. "I need to sit down," Jason said, suddenly unsteady. Once seated, he explained his history with Elizabeth, watching comprehension dawn on Sophia's face. "The bracelet Harper wears. I had it custom made for Elizabeth 12 years ago. It has our initials hidden in the links." Sophia's eyes widened. "And Harper is 11, Jason calculated quickly. She would be 11 now. The timing aligned perfectly with their breakup. If Elizabeth had discovered her pregnancy after he left. "I need to know for certain," Jason said. "But how? I can't exactly demand a DNA test from a child I just met." "You need to tread very carefully," Sophia cautioned. "This isn't a corporate takeover, Jason. This is a young girl who's already lost her mother." Over the following week, Jason initiated a discreet investigation. Birth records confirmed Harper's birth date, exactly 9 months after his departure for Silicon Valley. Elizabeth had listed no father on the birth certificate. He obtained a photograph of Harper as a toddler, gasping at the unmistakable resemblance to his own childhood pictures, the same determined set of the jaw, the same analytical gaze. The evidence was overwhelming, yet Jason oscillated between elation and rage. He had a daughter, a brilliant, articulate daughter he'd never known existed. Elizabeth had kept Harper from him for 11 years, denying them both a relationship that could never be recovered. One evening, unable to contain his turmoil, Jason drove to Mount Auburn Cemetery, where Elizabeth was buried. Standing before her, simple headstone, rain soaking through his expensive coat, he finally unleashed the storm inside him. "How could you?" he demanded of the silent stone. "You had no right to keep her from me. Was this punishment? Revenge for choosing my career?" His anger gradually gave way to grief, not just for Elizabeth, but for the years lost with Harper, for the family they might have been. "I would have come back," he whispered, rain mingling with tears on his face. "If I'd known about her, I would have come back." As Jason left the cemetery, he noticed a car parked nearby. Inside sat Gloria Williams, Harper's grandmother, watching him with a mixture of suspicion and apprehension. She had recognized him from the graduation ceremony and followed him, protective, instincts on high alert. Their eyes met through the rain-streaked windshield, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The secret was unraveling. Jason consulted with both a family therapist and his most trusted attorneys before taking any action. "This isn't a business acquisition," the therapist reminded him firmly. "This is a child's life." With a carefully considered plan, Jason arranged a meeting with Gloria Williams at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near the community center. The elderly woman arrived precisely on time, her posture rigid with protective determination. "I know who you are," Gloria said without preamble as she sat across from him. "I've seen your face on magazines for years. I always wondered if you knew." "I didn't," Jason replied simply. "Not until I saw the bracelet." Gloria studied him with penetrating eyes reminiscent of her granddaughters. "Elizabeth never told you?" "No. I left for California. The relationship ended. I had no idea she was pregnant." Gloria's expression softened slightly. "She considered telling you, many times. I have a box of letters she wrote but never sent." "Why didn't she?" The question had tormented Jason for weeks. Gloria sighed, her eyes distant with memory. "Elizabeth said you had made your choice, your career over a life with her. She didn't want you to feel obligated to a family you never chose." The words struck Jason like physical blows. Hadn't he insisted to Elizabeth that he was leaving for them? Yet she had seen through his ambitious rationalizations to the truth underneath. "Would you have come back?" Gloria asked, watching him carefully. "If you had known?" Jason considered the ambitious young man he'd been, so hungrily pursuing success. "I want to say yes," he admitted. "But I don't know. I was different then." His honesty seemed to earn a small measure of Gloria's respect. "At least you're not lying to yourself," she observed. "Elizabeth always said that was your best quality, when you allowed it." They spent the next hour discussing Harper, her intelligence, her artistic talent inherited from her mother, her stubborn determination so like her unknown father. Gloria shared photographs from Harper's childhood, each image a physical reminder of what Jason had missed. "What do you want now?" Gloria finally asked. "Why reveal yourself after all this time?" "I want to know my daughter," Jason said simply. "I can't get back the years I've lost, but I don't want to lose any more." Together with Sophia's help, they developed a careful plan to introduce Jason as Harper's father. He created a special digital art program at the community center, knowing it would draw Harper's interest. Over several sessions, he got to know her better, her love of animation, her thoughtful approach to creative problems, her quiet confidence. Gloria watched these interactions carefully, protective but increasingly reassured by Jason's genuine care for Harper's well-being. "She has your analytical mind," Gloria told him after one session. "But Elizabeth's heart. Thank God for that." When the time finally came to tell Harper the truth, Jason was terrified in a way no business crisis had ever made him feel. They chose a Saturday afternoon at Gloria's modest home, creating a safe space for whatever reaction might come. "There's something important we need to tell you," Gloria began, sitting beside Harper on the worn living room sofa. "Harper," Gloria began gently, "you know how we've always talked about your mom and all the wonderful things about her, but we've never talked much about your father?" Harper nodded, her intelligent eyes moving between her grandmother and Jason. There was already a suspicion growing there. a connection her quick mind was beginning to make. The truth is, Gloria continued, your mother made a decision years ago, a decision she thought was best at the time. Mr. Miller is my father, Harper said quietly, her gaze fixed on Jason. It wasn't a question. Jason felt his chest tighten. Yes, he confirmed, his voice barely steady. I am. Harper's expression cycled through multiple emotions, surprise, confusion, anger. Did you know? All this time? No, Jason answered honestly. I only realized when I saw the bracelet at the graduation ceremony. The one that belonged to your mother. Harper's hand moved protectively to her wrist where the sapphire bracelet rested. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't Mom tell me? Her voice rose slightly, trembling with emotion. Your mother thought she was protecting both of you. Gloria explained. Protecting us from what? Harper demanded, her eyes filling with tears. From knowing each other? That's not protection, that's... She stood suddenly, grabbing her backpack. I need to think. Before either adult could stop her, she rushed out the front door. Jason started to follow, but Gloria caught his arm. Give her a minute, I know where she'll go. 20 minutes later, Jason stood outside a modest apartment building where Elizabeth and Harper had lived before the accident. The property manager, recognizing Gloria, had reluctantly let them into the now vacant unit. They found Harper sitting in the empty living room, her back against the wall where faint marks still showed, where pictures had once hung. This was my home, she said, not looking up as they entered. With Mom. But it was all based on lies. Not lies, Jason said, carefully sitting across from her. Complicated choices. Your mother did what she thought was best. Why didn't you look for us? Harper asked, finally meeting his eyes with a directness that reminded him painfully of Elizabeth. I didn't know about you, Jason repeated. If I had, would you have come? The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Jason hesitated, then chose honesty. I'd like to say yes immediately, but the truth is, I was different then, focused entirely on my career. Your mother knew that. Harper seemed to appreciate his candor. So what happens now? You found out you have a daughter and suddenly want to play family. I'd like to know you, Jason said simply. I've missed 11 years. I don't want to miss any more. But this has to happen at your pace, not mine. The tension in Harper's shoulders eased slightly. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn book, Elizabeth's journal. Mom wrote about you sometimes. She wondered if she made the right choice not telling you. Jason swallowed hard. May I see? Harper hesitated, then handed him the journal. Jason's hands trembled as he opened it, finding Elizabeth's familiar handwriting across the pages. Harper asks about her father sometimes, one entry read. I tell her he lives far away working on important things. Not entirely untrue. I watch Jason's company growing, his success mounting, and wonder if I robbed them both of a relationship. But would he have resented giving up his dreams for an unexpected family? Would Harper have grown up feeling like an obligation rather than a joy? I made my choice. I hope someday she'll understand why. The news broke 3 days later. Tech billionaire discovers secret daughter, screamed the headlines across every major outlet. Photographers camped outside Gloria's modest home and Harper's school, forcing her to stay home as reporters shouted questions at any visitor. How did they find out? Jason demanded, pacing the sleek conference room where his crisis management team had assembled. Marcus shook his head. Someone at the community center, maybe? Or at Harper's school? It doesn't matter now. We need to get ahead of this. The PR team proposed a carefully crafted statement acknowledging Harper as Jason's daughter, discovered only recently due to Elizabeth's untimely death, followed by legal action against any outlet harassing the minor. We'll control the narrative, the head of communications assured him. Position you as the devoted father reconnecting with his long-lost child. Jason stared at her, suddenly disgusted by the clinical approach to something so personal. This isn't a product launch. This is my daughter's life. Before he could continue, his assistant interrupted. Mr. Miller, Robert Reynolds is here. He's demanding to see you immediately. Elizabeth's brother stormed into the conference room moments later, a tall man with the same auburn hair Elizabeth had, though his was streaked with gray and his face was tight with fury. You have some nerve, Robert snarled, ignoring everyone. But Jason. 12 years of silence, and now you think you can just claim her? Robert, Jason began, signaling his team to leave them. I understand you're upset. Upset? You abandoned my sister when she was pregnant with your child, and now that she's gone, you want to play daddy? Harper has a family. She doesn't need you swooping in with your billions trying to buy her affection. I didn't know Elizabeth was pregnant, Jason said quietly. She never told me. A convenient story, Robert scoffed. But even if that's true, where were you all these years? Too busy building your empire to ever check on the woman you supposedly loved? The accusation hit its mark. Why hadn't he ever reached out to Elizabeth? Pride? Fear? The relentless forward momentum of ambition that never allowed for looking back? Robert wasn't finished. Harper and Gloria were doing just fine before you showed up. Now my niece can't even go to school without reporters hounding her. This is what your world does to people. It destroys privacy, dignity, normalcy. After Robert left, promising legal action if Jason didn't back off, the crisis deepened. Robert filed an emergency petition for guardianship, claiming Jason was an absentee father with no understanding of Harper's needs, and that his sudden interest was disruptive to the child's well-being. Jason's first instinct was to crush the opposition with legal firepower. He instructed his attorneys to prepare the strongest possible counter-argument, leveraging his resources and influence. We'll win this, his lead counsel assured him. Reynolds doesn't have the resources to fight. You and no judge would rule against a biological father with your means. That evening, as Jason reviewed the aggressive legal strategy his team had prepared, Harper called him on the private number he'd given her. Everyone at school knows, she said, her voice small. Some kids are saying awful things about Mom. That she was that you paid her to. None of that is true, Jason said firmly, his heart breaking at the pain in her voice. Your mother was the most principled person I've ever known. Uncle Robert says you're going to use your money and lawyers to take me away from Grandma. Harper, that's not... Is that how you solve problems? She interrupted, a new hardness in her voice. By crushing people who disagree with you? By using your power and money to get what you want? The question hit Jason like a physical blow. It was exactly what he'd been preparing to do. Deploy his vast resources to overwhelm Robert's opposition, regardless of whether that approach was best for Harper. After they hung up, Jason sat alone in his office for hours. What kind of father did he want to be? What lesson was he teaching Harper with his first significant parental decision? Elizabeth's journal entry echoed in his mind. Would Harper have grown up feeling like an obligation rather than a joy? The next morning, Jason called his legal team. Cancel everything, he instructed. We're taking a completely different approach. 1 year had passed since Jason had discovered Harper was his daughter. Standing on the terrace of his penthouse, he watched her showing her grandmother the city view, pointing out landmarks with the confidence of someone who now felt at home in this once alien space. The transformation of the penthouse reflected the transformation in Jason's life. The formerly sterile designer showcase now featured Harper's artwork on the walls, photographs on shelves, and a state-of-the-art art studio where a rarely used guest room had once been. Even Rocky, his rescue dog, had a collection of toys scattered across the once immaculate floors. Dad, Harper called, still testing the word that had become more natural over months of careful relationship building. Can we take Grandma to that Italian place tonight? The one with the tiramisu? Absolutely, Jason replied, warming at the casual way she included him in her plans now. The path to this moment had been anything but smooth. Rather than battling Robert in court, Jason had taken a radically different approach. He'd requested mediation, acknowledged the legitimacy of the family's concerns, and proposed a gradual integration plan that prioritized Harper's emotional well-being above all else. His willingness to compromise had surprised everyone, perhaps himself most of all. The Jason Miller of a year ago would have viewed compromise as weakness, would have deployed every resource to win at any cost. Gradually, his sincerity had won over even the skeptical Robert. When Harper's uncle witnessed Jason rearranging global business meetings to attend her school art show, something shifted in their adversarial relationship. "You're not who I thought you were," Robert had admitted grudgingly after watching Jason spend hours helping Harper with a challenging digital art project. Jason had established the Elizabeth Reynolds Foundation, providing arts education to underserved communities and scholarships to single parents pursuing creative careers. The foundation quickly became his primary focus as he stepped back from daily operations at Miller Technologies. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus had asked when Jason announced his reduced role at the company. "This is everything you built." "No," Jason had replied, watching Harper collaborate with Sophia on a community mural project. "This is everything I built. That was just a company." Now, preparing for Harper's 12th birthday celebration, Jason felt a contentment that had eluded him throughout his years of wealth accumulation. Gloria had moved into a comfortable house near both the school and Jason's penthouse, allowing Harper to divide her time between both homes. Jason had carefully ensured the renovation preserved the cherished character of Gloria's home, while adding modern conveniences. As guests arrived for the celebration, classmates, friends from the community center, Robert and his family who had flown in from London, Jason retreated briefly to his office. From his safe, he removed a small jewelry box. When the cake had been cut and the traditional songs sung, Jason presented Harper with his gift. "This is to complement the one your mother gave you," he explained as she opened the box to reveal a second sapphire bracelet, crafted to match Elizabeth's original but bearing the initials H and J discreetly worked into the links. Harper's eyes filled with tears as she connected the meaning between the two bracelets. "It's perfect," she whispered, immediately putting it on her other wrist. "I have something for you too," she said, leading him to her computer. "I've been working on it for months." On the screen appeared a beautifully designed digital museum, a loving archive of Elizabeth's life as a mother. Using skills Jason had taught her, Harper had created a virtual gallery of photographs, artwork, and journal entries that captured the 11 years he had missed. "Now you can see who she really was," Harper explained softly. "Not just who she was to you, but who she was to me." As Jason moved through the virtual exhibit, seeing Elizabeth with baby Harper, toddler Harper, elementary school Harper, the bedtime stories, art projects, Halloween costumes, quiet moments of maternal love, he felt a complex mixture of grief and gratitude. "She wanted me to know you," Harper said, pointing to a journal entry dated from shortly before the accident. "She was planning to contact you that summer. She wrote that it was time." The revelation struck Jason deeply. Elizabeth had chosen to reach out after all those years, only to have fate intervene with cruel timing. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Harper was staying at Gloria's for the night, Jason stood alone on his terrace, both sapphire bracelets weaving through his thoughts, one that had once symbolized a painful ending, the other a new beginning. Success, he realized, could not be measured in market share or stock prices. The real value in life lay in connections, in second chances, in the messy, imperfect love that tied one human being to another. The man who once had everything now finally had something that mattered.